Picture this, a typical American kitchen in late November. The oven is glowing. A turkey rests at the center of the room, the gravitational pull of every movement around it. Butter, salt, and herbs fill the air. In the living room, the television plays the familiar parade, giant balloons drifting between skyscrapers. No one needs to say what day it is. Everyone already knows. This is Thanksgiving. Everything happens exactly the way it always does. Plates come out of the same cabinet. Chairs are pulled from the same corners. The same sequence of actions repeated so many times that it no longer requires thought. Someone checks their phone. Someone stirs the gravy. Someone complains that the turkey looks a little dry this year. Outside it's cold. Inside the house is warm. This is the feeling the holiday always delivers. Safe, familiar, in the right place. Then comes the most familiar moment of all. Someone clears their throat. Conversation stops. Heads bow. A few words about gratitude are spoken. Short, vague. Family, health, being together. No one says exactly what they are grateful for. No one asks why this meal, out of every meal in the year, requires a ritual this solemn. And that's the detail worth noticing, because Thanksgiving isn't just a family dinner, it's a national ritual. One of the very few rituals nearly the entire country performs at the same time, in the same way, with the same story quietly running in the background. And strangely, very few people actually know where that story begins. In school, the version is simple: starving pilgrims, kind natives, a shared meal, a moment of peace, a short story, easy to remember, easy to teach children, warm enough that no one feels the need to ask anything more. But pause for a second and ask a very basic question. If this moment is truly that beautiful, why does it need to be told the same way for generation after generation? Truly solid stories don't need that much protection. Only fragile stories need to be simplified. Thanksgiving doesn't exist because it's the oldest holiday. It exists because it's useful. It compresses a violent, complicated, deeply conflicted chapter of history into an image small enough to fit on a family table: a turkey, a prayer, a story about peace. There's no room here for difficult questions, no room for people who don't fit the picture, and certainly no room for consequences that stretch across centuries. If someone at the table today suddenly asked why this holiday exists at all, the reaction would be immediate. Someone would laugh it off. Someone would say, "Don't ruin the mood." Someone would change the subject, not because they're cruel, but because rituals work best when you don't touch them. Every ritual has a function. The function of this one isn't to remember. It's a choice of what will be remembered. And when a nation chooses its memory, something else is always left behind. The turkey is carved. Plates are filled. The room grows louder. The holiday unfolds exactly as expected. Another Thanksgiving completed. What almost no one notices is that the real story of this day isn't on the table. It's in everything that never gets placed there. And if you want to understand what Thanksgiving actually is, you have to go back to the moment before the story was made easy to swallow, before it became a ritual, before it became a tradition, before it became something no one dares to question. The classroom lights are on. Desks are pushed against the walls to make space in the center. On the children's heads are paper hats, roughly cut black and white, and strips of colorful feathers taped on in a hurry. Laughter fills the room as they run back and forth, still not used to the weight of what they're wearing. A paper backdrop hangs behind them, painted with a blue sky, a few huts, and a long table. The teacher stands at the front, phone in hand, telling them to stand closer together for the photo. This is an elementary school classroom, and this is where the story begins. The children don't know who they're playing. They only know they're part of something fun. Some are told to stand on this side because they're wearing darker hats. Others are placed on the other side because they have feathers. There is no long explanation, no complicated context. Just one image to remember. Everyone meets, everyone shares, everyone smiles. The camera flashes, the teacher smiles too. This moment is called education. In these pictures, there is no prolonged hunger, no fear, no doubt, no winters that kill, no decisions made in desperation. No one is losing their home, their land, their family. Only characters carefully selected to fit inside the frame. A child, standing near the back, looks at the picture on the wall. They tilt their head as if trying to fit the pieces together. When the teacher turns away, the child asks a very small question, very slowly without trying to disrupt anything. They ask whether it really happened like that. The question doesn't make anyone angry, but it makes the room pause for a very brief moment. The teacher turns back, smiles, and answers with a familiar line, light enough not to make anyone uncomfortable, simple enough for the whole class to understand. A clean story. No sharp edges, no excess. The child nods. They don't argue. They simply register it, and the story moves on. That's how these stories survive. Not by forbidding questions, but by answering them with a pre-built template. A template safe enough that no one has to stop and sit with it for too long. Inside that template, there are good people and other good people. There is one beautiful moment, framed and repeated. There is no real conflict, no consequence, no sequel, and most importantly, no one disappears. But in every story passed down across generations, the most telling detail is not what appears, but what is no longer present. Some characters don't fit the lesson and are removed. Details that make adults uneasy are trimmed away. Truths that, if told fully, would make the story unusable. The children don't know this. They don't need to. Their only task is to remember the version they're given, and that version is written very carefully. In this version, history is not a complicated chain of events. It's a performance, with costumes, with roles, with a clear ending. No one dies, no one loses, no one has to leave. The storyteller of this version isn't standing at a podium. It lives in textbooks, in drawings, in end-of-year plays. It repeats often enough that it no longer feels like a story being told. It becomes background. And when a story becomes background, it stops being questioned. That's when it begins doing its real work. Not teaching history, teaching safety. Safety here doesn't mean truth. It means no disruption. No questions children aren't taught to ask. No answers adults aren't ready to give. The problem is that real history doesn't work like that. History doesn't care whether a story is easy to tell. It only leaves traces, and traces are not always preserved. Between two choices, society usually picks the one with less risk. Teach children a clean, simple, memorable story, or give them a complex, conflicted truth and ask them to live with uncertainty. This choice is rarely spoken aloud, but it is made again and again, year after year, class after class. When a story is chosen for children, it doesn't just shape memory. It shapes the limits of memory. It decides which questions are acceptable and which ones should be swallowed whole. The safer the story, the higher the cost of keeping it safe. And that cost is usually paid in what is left untold. The child in that classroom will grow up. They won't remember that day clearly, but they will remember the feeling that this story is finished, explained, closed, no need to reopen it. And years later, when they sit at a dinner table somewhere, the story will return without needing to be named, because it was learned early, in a brightly lit room, surrounded by laughter, under harmless paper hats. The safest stories are often the most expensive ones to maintain. And that price is rarely taught alongside the lesson. Night falls over a European city. Outside, lights reflect on wet pavement. Laughter spills out of taverns. Music and voices blur together. Bodies move freely, loosened by drink and relief. Life is happening loudly, without asking permission. Inside a sealed room, candlelight burns low. Windows are covered. A group stands close together, heads bowed, prayers whispered. No one looks outside. To them, what happens beyond these walls is not joy, but decay, not life, but temptation. They don't see themselves as a minority. They see themselves as what remains correct in a fallen world. There's no space for laughter in these prayers. Every sound is controlled, every behavior observed. Eyes pass over one another, not to share, but to measure. Who is strict enough? Who is pure enough? Who is beginning to slip past the boundary? Outside is the world of them and their kind. Inside is the world of the others. They call themselves the chosen, not in a loud, arrogant way, but in something colder. They believe fate has already been decided. Some are saved, some are not. Not because of actions, not because of effort, but because of the will of a higher power that cannot be questioned. This belief brings comfort. It also creates an anxiety that never fully fades. Because if destiny is fixed, how can anyone be certain which side they are on? The only answer is signs, and signs must be visible. From there, language begins to divide people, not by geography, but by words. There are those like us, and there are strangers, saints and strangers. These words do more than describe. They organize the world. They decide who can be trusted, who must be watched, and who can be excluded without guilt. A person is no longer a person first. They are a label. In this community, tolerance is not considered a virtue. It is a threat, because tolerance allows difference to remain, and difference, if allowed to exist long enough, erodes purity. The outside world is not dangerous because it is violent. It is dangerous because it is attractive. Children here are taught how to see the world early, not through long sermons, but through small warnings. Don't listen to that music. Don't dress like that. Don't talk too long with that person. Each warning carries the same assumption. The world is trying to pull you away. Your task is to stand still. But standing still is the hardest thing when everything around you is moving. And so the community begins to close in on itself, not to protect the world from them, but to protect them from the world. Belief in predestination leaves no room for ambiguity, no tolerance for gray zones. A person belongs inside or outside. There is no middle. From this, surveillance becomes part of daily life. No one calls it that. It is disguised as care, as a concern, as communal responsibility. Who prays long enough? Who misses too many gatherings? Who speaks differently? Who begins to ask questions? Because questions are the greatest threat, not because they lead to rebellion, but because they introduce the possibility that the world is not as simple as it has been taught. And once that possibility appears, order begins to crack. This is the choice the community faces: tolerate the world and risk dissolving from within, or purify to survive as a single body, even if the cost is isolation and fear. They choose the second path. That decision is not made in a single night. It forms across hundreds of prayers, thousands of suspicious glances, and countless moments of convincing themselves they are doing the right thing. They do not leave because they are weak. They leave because they want control. Control over space. Control over influence. Control over the next generation. Europe, with its open streets, fast-moving ideas, and children who begin to speak differently, is no longer safe. It allows too many things to exist at once. It refuses to choose a side, and to them a world that refuses to choose is a hostile one. So the idea of leaving begins to form, not as an escape, but as a project, an opportunity to rebuild the world in the correct order, a place where boundaries can be redrawn from the beginning, a place where they can be the center instead of the exception. When they speak of this journey, they do not use the word escape. They use the word purification, purifying the community of corrupting influence, purifying life of temptation, purifying the future of uncertainty. In that language, leaving is not failure. It is an initiative. Those who stay behind look at them with confusion. Some feel pity, some see extremism, but no one understands that for this group, staying is what is impossible. Staying means watching their children become strangers. In that prayer room that night, the requests are not aimed outward. They turn inward, asking to remain firm, asking to remain different. asking to be separated from a world moving too fast. They believe they are protecting something sacred. What they are really protecting is power, the power to decide who belongs where, who is right, and who must be left behind. They do not leave because they are weak. They leave because they want power. Leiden appears in daylight. Canals run parallel to stone streets. Still water reflects tall, narrow houses with open windows. People pass without lowering their heads. They talk in the middle of the street. They laugh loudly. They don't look around to make sure they are allowed to do so. This is a city so accustomed to freedom, it doesn't need to name it. And that is exactly what begins to suffocate this group. Their children step into the streets with different eyes. Not cautious eyes, but curious ones. They pick up new words faster than their parents expect. They grow used to music drifting out of neighboring windows. They begin answering in a language that no longer fully belongs to the family. The change is not loud, but it is constant. The parents notice before they can fully name it. One child comes home later than usual because play stretches on. Another begins asking why things that were once forbidden are acceptable here. There is no open defiance, only questions that are no longer easy to shut down. Leiden does not force them to change. It simply shows that change is possible. Inside a small house, doors closed, light falling onto an empty wooden table, a family sits facing one another. No one touches the food. The father speaks of discipline and order. The mother speaks of safety and the future. Someone else speaks of community, of promises made, of the responsibility to keep things from being diluted. Across the table, a younger voice asks why they cannot live like the people outside, not to rebel, just to understand. The conversation does not explode. It stretches, heavy, full of silence, because everyone understands what is being weighed. Keep the community intact, or allow the children to merge into a larger society. Leiden does not punish them for being different. It does not demand they abandon their faith. It simply refuses to build fences. And to them, the absence of fences is the greatest danger. Because once boundaries blur, control begins to slip. In private meetings, the tone begins to shift. Gratitude for tolerance gives way to warnings. Leiden allows too many things to exist at once. Too many ways of living. Too many ways of thinking. Too many futures. A society that refuses to choose a side in their eyes is a society that cannot be trusted. The decision to leave does not come from panic. It comes from calculation. If they stay, their children will continue to adapt. If their children adapt, the community will lose its ability to shape the next generation. And if the next generation no longer resembles them, this community will become nothing more than memory. Leaving becomes the only way to preserve form. They begin speaking of another place. A place not yet mixed. A place without habits of tolerance. A place where rules can be written before children learn how to question them. Not a paradise, a space to control. The choice is clear, even if no one says it aloud. The freedom of the children means risk, difference, no return. The purity of the community means limits, discipline, things held in place. To them, freedom is not neutral, it is a force. It pulls people away from a predetermined order, and an order pulled too far will collapse. So they choose to close in before it is too late. The final days in Leiden pass with a double feeling: gratitude for a place that offered shelter, resentment for the openness that threatens what they hold sacred. They walk familiar streets. They watch their children blend into the crowd. They see a future they cannot control. And so they turn away, not because they are driven out, but because they cannot endure being allowed to choose. In their thinking, a good society knows how to say no. No to outside influence. No to mixture. No to questions that loosen order. Tolerance, when it lasts too long, becomes a threat. They do not leave to be freed. They leave to be sealed. When they speak of the journey ahead, they use words that sound elevated: protection, preservation, purification. Words that feel necessary. reasonable, even moral, but they all point to the same destination. They are not chasing freedom, they are chasing isolation. The ship's hold is dark and low. The air is thick with dampness, sweat vomit, and wet wood. The hull groans every time a wave strikes, as if the entire structure is under more pressure than it can bear. Bodies lie pressed against bodies. Breaths overlap. Illness spreads fast in a space with nowhere to escape. No one is certain anymore whether the ship is moving forward or simply trying not to break apart in the middle of the ocean. The order here is so thin you can hear it cracking. The people on board are not the same. They are headed to the same place, but not for the same reason. Some carry ideology. They carry the belief that they are fulfilling a righteous mission, that enduring this suffering is the price of building a pure society. Others carry economic hope, labor contracts, promises of land, of opportunity, of a better life. They are known by two unofficial names, crude but effective: the chosen and the strangers. In the cramped hold, these differences cannot be hidden. One person prays more, another complains more. Some cling to strict discipline. Others are only trying to survive the crossing. Small frictions turn quickly into sparks. A word spoken with the wrong tone, an action judged disrespectful, a glance taken as a challenge. There is no space to step away. A heavy wave tilts the ship violently. Belongings crash to the floor. Voices shout in the dark. In moments like this, every ideology collapses into the same point: fear. But when the sea briefly calms, the divisions rise again. Who has the right to command? Who has the right to decide? Who is leading whom? No one has been elected. There is no clear structure of authority. The old rules from Europe no longer function in the middle of the ocean. The new rules do not yet exist. This is the most dangerous state for a community. Not total lawlessness, but laws that have not had time to form. Then the ship loses its course. The intended destination is no longer ahead of the bow. Maps become useless. Early calculations lose their value, and with them, every unspoken agreement begins to unravel. If they do not land where promised, who has the right to rule when they reach shore? Confusion spreads faster than disease. Those who never had a voice begin to speak. They are no longer bound by the original commitments. They did not sign on to submit to an order that does not yet exist. Some begin to say that once they reach land, they will do as they please. No one will have authority over anyone else. For those who believe in order and purity, this is the worst possible future. A community without discipline, a society born from chaos, a new world beginning in disobedience. In the hold, whispered conversations multiply, not to share, but to contain. If they allow anarchy from the start, everything they have endured until now will become meaningless. And so a solution is proposed, not as an ideal, but as a patch, a short document, a temporary agreement, a promise that before anyone is free, everyone must submit to a shared order. No one believes it is perfect. No one thinks it is fair to all. But under these conditions, it is the only thing that can keep the ship from breaking apart from within. Some sign with conviction, some sign reluctantly, some sign because there is no other choice. The moment the pen touches the paper, something important happens. The order is signed into existence, not because it descends from above, but because fear of chaos forces people to accept it. This is the choice placed before them: absolute freedom in a lawless space where the stronger will prevail, or a fragile collective agreement in exchange for a chance to survive. They choose to sign, not because they love order, but because they fear what will happen without it. In the ship's hold, the air remains heavy. Illness remains. Waves continue to strike. But a new feeling begins to seep in. Not hope, just a thin thread of it. The sense that at least they have not torn themselves apart before reaching land. The ship moves on, carrying people who never fully agreed, but have accepted being bound together by a document. A young order born not from lofty ideals, but from the fear of dying in the middle of the ocean. They sign the order into existence because chaos would kill them first. Snow lies thick around the settlement. The ground is as hard as stone. Numb hands scrape away thin layers, just deep enough to hide a body before night falls. There are no long rites, no clear markers. Graves are carefully flattened, not out of respect, but so no one at a distance can see how weak they are becoming. When the wind rises, traces disappear faster than memory. Death is handled like an urgent task, not something meant to be remembered. They learn how to bury the dead in silence and how to keep living without looking back. The cold does not come only from the snow. It comes from wind cutting through unfinished walls, from clothing too thin from houses thrown together that were never meant to endure this kind of winter. Nights stretch long. Light comes briefly. Each morning is a test of who is still breathing. Illness spreads slowly but surely. Fever, coughing, weakness. Bodies that survive the ocean cannot survive this shore. Food dwindles. Rations shrink a little more each day. No one says the numbers out loud, but everyone knows. Only a few remain strong enough to walk, to carry water, to break ice, to stand back up after falling. The rest lie still waiting for their turn or waiting for something to change. The wind cuts through every plane. Those who once spoke of order speak less now, not because their beliefs have changed, but because their bodies no longer have the strength to sustain them. In the cold, every ideology is pulled into the same question: who will still be alive tomorrow? The answers grow fewer. The new settlement does not look like a beginning. It looks like a pause for people who cannot go on. Houses sink into the snow, paths are erased by the wind. Face hollow, eyes sunken, voices thin. If someone looked from a distance, they would not see a dream taking shape. They would see a field hospital where people are trying to hold each other together with whatever remains. There is no celebration, only counting. They count the living. They count those who no longer rise. They count the days left before food runs out. The numbers are never written down, but they sit inside every decision. There is no plan to retreat. There is no road back. The sea is frozen. The ship is gone. The old world is too far away. The choice becomes stark: stay and die slowly, or leave and die faster. No one speaks of leaving because there is nowhere to go. On the longest nights, they lie listening to the wind strike the walls and understand something no one wants to admit. They traded everything for order, and now order is not saving them. It only helps them die in rows, quietly, neatly. The price of control has never been clearer. They continue to hide the graves, not to deceive others, but to deceive themselves. That they have not collapsed. Those things are still under control. The project has not failed. Belief becomes the final layer of clothing, thinner than they expected, but all they have left. Time moves so slowly that each day feels like a season. Those with strength are pulled into every task, not because of skill, but because they can still stand. Roles shift with physical condition. Today, the one carrying water. Tomorrow, the one lying still. If this story were to end here, it would end quietly. No drums, no grand tragedy. Just a gradual disappearance of a community unsuited to the conditions it chose. This winter should end the story, but something breaks the rhythm of death, not with an explosion, not with a divine sign, with an arrival that was never part of any plan. One morning before the snow melts, someone sees movement at the edge of the settlement. Not an illusion, not wind, a human figure. Then another, walking steadily, not shaking, not carrying the marks of a winter that has crushed everyone else. The news spreads faster than illness ever did. Those still able to stand gather to look. No one cheers. No one dares to believe. Hope, at this moment, is the most dangerous thing of all. It could finish off the last survivors if it proves false. Still they look. The others come closer. They do not bring order from the shore. They do not bring papers. They bring knowledge of how to live here. And that changes everything. They are weeks from extinction. And then someone walks in. The corn cache lies beneath frozen earth. A trembling hand scrapes away the hardened mud layer by layer until it reaches something smoother, harder, carefully wrapped. When the lid is opened, the smell of cold soil mixes with dry kernels. There is no cheer, no prayer, only shallow breaths, and the sense that this may be the line between life and death. In that moment, the corn pit looks no different from a life-saving safe. They know exactly what they are doing. No explanation is needed. This is not their land. This is not their food. These kernels were buried to last the winter by people who know this place well enough to know what to hide and where to hide it. But winter has crushed every simple moral boundary. When stomachs are empty and legs no longer hold right and wrong blur quickly, they begin searching for more, not just corn. Other items surface from empty houses: tools, pots, burial goods. Things were left behind with the assumption that their owners would return when the weather allowed. The abandoned village looks more like an opportunity than a place that belongs to anyone. No locked doors, no guards, only silence. That silence makes everything easier. There are no eyes to meet, no voices to object, no one to say this is wrong. They call it taking what is necessary. They call it borrowing in an emergency. Language becomes a tool to lighten the weight in their hands. But inside, everyone understands. This is not an exchange, no agreement. This is taking. Back in the settlement, the corn is divided. No one asks where it came from. No one wants to know. Knowing would force a decision, and decisions in this condition are a burden no one has the strength left to carry. The food disappears quickly. Life stretches a few more days. Someone stands a week longer. Someone survives a fever. Those small numbers are enough to turn theft into a reasonable act in many minds. But each return to the empty village feels heavier. The houses are not destroyed. The belongings are not disturbed beyond what is necessary. Signs of a life paused, not ended, as if the owners simply stepped away and could return at any moment. The narrator stops here and places you in that position. You crossed the ocean. You buried the people you love. You are hungry beyond clear thought. In front of you is food hidden carefully for someone else. Do you take it? If you don't, you may die in days. If you do, you live longer with something broken inside. There is no clean choice, only the choice to keep breathing or not. Some say this is where morality must yield to survival. Others say nothing and keep digging. There is no formal declaration, no meeting, no vote. The first theft happens quietly, and because it saves lives, it opens the path for the next. The most dangerous thing is not taking it once. It is learning how to live with it. Once you have taken food, to survive the next boundary is easier to cross. You begin to see empty houses as storage. You begin to think that if they are not here, the food is being wasted. And once that thought appears, taking no longer needs justification. But absence is not disappearance. It is only temporary. They do not know this, or they do not allow themselves to think about it, because thinking about it would make everything harder. It would turn every kernel into an accusation, every meal into a debt. Winter has not loosened its grip. Each extra day of life is paid for with something else, a piece of belief, a piece of the story they tell about themselves. They left Europe to avoid mixture, to preserve purity, and now to survive, they must enter the lives of others and take what is not theirs. They do not smash homes. They do not burn houses. They do not kill anyone. And because of that, they convince themselves they are still good people, that this is an exception. That is when things pass, they will make it right. But an exception repeated becomes a rule. Each time the corn pit is opened, a line grows thinner. No one speaks of it, but everyone feels it. A community built on order and control now survives by breaking the order of others. And this does not end here. because the people they take from have not vanished. They are simply not here yet. They will return. And when they do, the memory of the first theft will no longer be a story of survival. It will become the starting point of something much longer. A morning quieter than usual. The snow has pulled back, but the cold still clings to the air. Those still able to stand move around the settlement, slowly, cautiously. Then there is movement at the edge. Not the familiar shapes seen the day before. A man steps out from the trees alone, unarmed, unhurried. He stops close enough to be clearly seen and then speaks. "Welcome, Englishmen." The sound freezes everything. No one moves, no one answers, not because they don't understand, but because they understand too well. English, clearly pronounced. Not borrowed phrases, not clumsy fragments. A complete greeting. In that instant, every assumption collapses. The survivors look at one another, searching for an explanation, but there is none. This scene exists in no script. No page ever said the first person to enter this settlement would speak their language. There was no plan for this moment. The silence stretches long enough to become heavy. The man stands still, patient, not smiling, not threatening, simply watching as if he knows his presence alone is already a shock. Finally, someone steps forward, not to assert authority, only to break the paralysis spreading through the group. They exchange a few short sentences, slow, careful. The man introduces himself. His name is Samoset. He says he has seen them from afar. He says he knows where they come from. He says they are not the first. Each sentence adds another layer of surprise. Then he adds one more thing. There is someone else, someone who understands them better, someone who can say more, someone who once lived in their world. The words change the rhythm of everyone's breathing. Samoset does not stay long. He comes to open the first door and then leaves the way he arrived, quietly, without explanation. But he leaves behind a truth that cannot be withdrawn. For an Indigenous man to speak fluent English, a path must have been opened long before this moment. And that path could not have been gentle. The narrator pauses here, not to build suspense, but to pose an uncomfortable question. How does a language cross an ocean before a ship does? Language does not swim across the sea. It travels with people, and people do not always travel by choice. For someone to stand here speaking English, understanding their customs, their glances, their fear, there must have been other journeys, other encounters, other losses. The people in the settlement do not know this yet. They only know that at last there is something that is not trying to kill them, a voice that understands them, a fragile bridge. After weeks of facing anonymous death, being understood even partially feels like a gift. Hope arrives this way, not as victory, but as a postponement of despair. They are not safe, but they are no longer completely blind. In the days that follow, waiting feels different. No longer just waiting for death, but waiting for the return of the one who said he could help them speak. When that person arrives, they will have a new choice, not good or bad, just less darkness. But the narrator does not let you move on too quickly, because here is something that must be remembered. The appearance of a translator is not the beginning of peace. It is proof of what came before. Someone was taken. Someone was kept. Someone was forced to learn this language under conditions that never make it into holiday stories. Language carries the history of violence even when it is used to greet. When they hear English spoken from the mouth of someone who does not belong to their world, they see hope. When the narrator looks deeper, he sees a fracture stretching from one ocean to another. But in that frozen settlement, they cannot afford an analysis. They only know that someone has arrived. Someone has spoken. And for the first time in a long while, their story is not only about survival. That thin hope will carry them forward, and its cost will come later. The translator is the proof. The crime came first. The ship draws close to shore, not in war or chaos, but like a brief stop. Men step onto land with promises of trade and curiosity. Squanto follows because he is called. There is no clear sign of danger, no shouting, just the moment when solid ground disappears behind him and cold wooden boards take its place. The chains do not need to tighten to make the truth clear. Closing is enough. The journey across the ocean is not told as a great tragedy. It is the continuation of having choice taken away. Day after day, unfamiliar language fills the air. Identity is redefined by the gaze of others. Squanto learns first to stay silent, then to listen, and finally to understand. English comes to him not as a gift, but as a tool required to survive. He is sold. No further detail is needed. His name no longer matters, only his value in someone else's hands. Years pass in spaces that are never his. But during that time, he learns how to speak, how to negotiate, how to read the intention behind words. Language becomes the one thing that cannot be taken from him. Then one day, the path back opens, not because of justice, but because of opportunity. Squanto returns to his land carrying something no one else has, the ability to understand both sides. But the world waiting for him is no longer the one he left. The village that once held life is silent. No children's voices, no cooking fires, no sign of ongoing life. Disease has passed through before he could return. Names do not matter. Origins do not matter. Only that it arrived with other ships. Squanto stands on familiar ground and realizes he is the last one who remembers how to call this place home. Thin hope appears and immediately turns into something heavier. Survival is no longer victory. It is a burden. His world was not defeated in battle. It was drained quietly. When Europeans step onto that empty land, they see something else. They see space. They see opportunity. They see a sign that the land is waiting for them. None of them sees the houses that once stood there. None of them heard the names that vanished. Absence is interpreted as permission. They call the land wild, and wild land requires no consent. To them, the lack of inhabitants is not a consequence. It is a message. Squanto stands between two worlds. On one side, the memory of people who are gone. On the other hand, people are slowly dying because they do not understand the land they have taken. He watches them dig the soil the wrong way, plant at the wrong time, die from mistakes that could be avoided, and he understands they are not going to disappear. The choice becomes clearer than any before it. Help those who come after, and watch them live on land emptied by the very world they brought. Or turn away and let everything end in hunger and hatred. No choice restores what was lost. Helping them is not forgiveness. It is accepted that the future will exist whether he wants it or not. And if that future cannot be stopped, then it must at least be shaped. Squanto chooses to live, but it is not a light choice. He teaches them how to plant corn, how to use fish as fertilizer, how to read the land. Knowledge not taken from books, but from generations no longer here to protect it. Each lesson is a quiet cut. Those being taught do not know what they are learning on top of. They call it help. They call it a miracle. Some call it the guidance of God. The empty land becomes proof that they are chosen. The narrator pauses here because this is where the story is usually softened. A kind native, grateful newcomers, a peaceful beginning. But the truth is colder. Squanto does not teach them on wild. He teaches them on land that has been emptied, not by nature, but by paths the other world opened long before. He is the survivor of a vanished world, training people who will never call that disappearance by its real name. Thin hope lives in the first harvests, but beneath it lies a deeper dread, because this new life is built on an absence that will never be acknowledged. He teaches them how to live on land made empty by the very world they carried with them. A cleared space opens at the center of the settlement. There is no real table, only logs laid crosswise. No flags, no symbols, no named ritual. Massasoit steps forward with those who follow him and stops at a distance close enough to read faces. The Europeans stand opposite, thinner after winter, still carrying the habit of defense in their eyes. No hands are shaken, No one smiles. This is not a meeting to make friends. It is a test of who needs whom more. The silence lasts just long enough for everyone to understand that no one here is granting favors. The survivors need time. Massasoit needs something else. To the west, the shadow of the Narragansett is always present. It does not need to be named often. Everyone knows the balance is shifting. The Wampanoag need guns. They need a new shield. They need an unpredictable factor to keep their enemy at a distance. The Europeans do not fully understand the boundaries between indigenous groups, but they understand one thing clearly. Alone, they will not survive. They need stable food. They need protection. They need time to stand upright. What they can offer is not kindness. It is present. It is weapons. It is the promise to stand on one side when needed. The conversation moves slowly through layers of mediation. There is no word for friendship, no sentence about trust. Everything is placed as unwritten terms. If one side is attacked, the other will assist. If disputes arise, they will be handled by agreed methods. No one says this is permanent. No one believes it is. The treaty forms like a contract for survival. No decoration, no emotion. It exists because both sides see the same immediate threat. The Narragansett is not a distant story. They are the pressure forcing the Wampanoag to seek a counterweight. And the newcomers, weak as they are, carry something that changes how others calculate risk. The narrator pauses here to clarify what is often blurred. This is not a moment of natural harmony. It is a cold arrangement of interests. Massasoit is not seeking friendship. He is seeking time and leverage. The Europeans are not seeking integration. They are seeking space to survive and grow. The choice is direct. Ally with strangers and accept unknown risks, or stand alone and be consumed by a familiar enemy. Both sides choose the first option because the second guarantees the worst outcome. The treaty is accepted. There is no cheer, no celebration, only a slight easing in posture. A door opens, not toward a bright future, but away from a future that would end too soon. In the months that follow, cooperation takes a practical form. Information is exchanged, warnings are shared, support is given when necessary. No one mistakes this for attachment. Each side keeps what is unsaid. Each maintains limits that are not crossed. The Europeans see immediate results. External pressure eases. They gain time to plant, to build, to reinforce. They begin to call these conditions by gentler names: peace, stability, coexistence. But beneath them, the original motives remain unchanged. Massasoit sees a temporary advantage, an enemy forced to recalculate. Breathing room is purchased by the presence of strangers. He does not confuse this balance with long-term safety. He only needs it to hold long enough. The narrator presses lightly on that fragility, because every agreement built on balance shares the same weakness. It survives only while the forces remain equal. When one side grows faster than expected, silent terms begin to speak. The Europeans carry something not written into the treaty: more people, arriving steadily. Each new ship landing shifts the balance slightly. At first, no one reacts. Then glances change. Calculations adjust. Peace holds, but it holds under tension. Everyone knows this cannot last unchanged. No one has yet named the moment when it breaks. The narrator does not call this betrayal, nor does he call it innocence. This is a strategy under harsh conditions, and strategy always has an expiration date. This treaty opens a door to survival. It allows both sides to exist a little longer, but it also plants the foundation for a question that will soon become unavoidable. What happens when one side no longer needs the treaty peace holds, right up until the balance of power flips? Gunshots echo through the harvest air. Not shots fired in anger, but shots of marksmanship. The sound travels into the forest and bounces back, like an announcement rather than entertainment. It lasts 3 days. The Wampanoag arrive in greater numbers than the Europeans. They set up camp around the settlement. They watch. they count. There is no long table draped in white cloth, no stage, only food conversation and eyes that never leave one another. If anyone calls this a feast, it is a disciplined one. The harvest has arrived. After a year of surviving on knowledge learned from someone else's land, the stores are finally enough to breathe. Celebration is real, but it is not the only reason so many gather. The presence of the Wampanoag is not accidental, and the guns fired are not for seasonal joy. They are signals. There is no traditional menu. No turkey is placed at the center of the story. Food comes from what is available, what is hunted, what is brought. There is no fairy tale moment where everyone bows their heads together in gratitude. No words about eternal harmony. Those details will come later, much later. For 3 days, what unfolds looks like an open-air summit, watching one another, assessing capability, measuring control of space, seeing who can gather people faster, who reacts to gunfire. This is not a family meal. This is a high-level meeting that neither side is ready to name. The narrator pauses and turns the familiar image over. If you are looking for warmth, it is not here. If you are searching for a symbol, it has not yet been created. What is happening is a test. The alliance just signed must be proven in reality. The Wampanoag arrive in force, not to share a meal. They arrive to show they have not vanished, to remind that this alliance does not place them in a weaker position. The Europeans fire guns not to show skill. They fire to demonstrate that what they carry has strategic value. Each side sends a message. No one speaks the message aloud, but everyone understands it. This is how peace is maintained in a world not yet accustomed to trust. Friendliness exists, but it is wrapped in vigilance. Later the story will be told differently. 3 days will be compressed into a single moment. The gunfire will disappear from collective memory. The number of Indigenous people will fade. Strategic purpose will be replaced by something more comforting, but at this moment, nothing has been rewritten yet. The narrator points to what symbols often hide. A feast can be both a celebration and a weapon. It can ease tension while measuring strength. It can produce an image of unity while leaving every boundary intact. This is a summit, no name cards, no minutes recorded, but its consequences last. The choice placed before the listener is simple. Believe the symbol told later, or look directly at the motive operating at the time. Both exist. Only one explains why events unfold as they do. In those 3 days, no one declares victory. No one leaves feeling completely safe. Only a temporary calm purchased by the fact that both sides believe they have not lost. Peace here is a temporary balance of fear. When night falls, campfires burn. Stories are told in small circles. Eyes remain alert. No one forgets that the alliance exists only as long as it remains useful. The feast ends. People depart. There's no promise for the following year. What remains is not a sweet memory. It is a template, a way to turn a complex event into a simple image, a way to select one part and leave the rest behind, a way a feast becomes a story. The narrator presses on this point because this is where history begins to bend, not through crude lies, but through selection. Which details are kept, which are discarded. The symbol is not created in that moment. It is sharpened across generations. What happened was not Thanksgiving, but it will be rewritten until it is Thanksgiving. Smoke rises from the edge of the town. Roofs smolder after a long night. Not everything is destroyed only enough to send a message. When the sun comes up, church bells ring, not an alarm, a gathering call. A declaration is read aloud, formal and brief. Today is a day of thanksgiving. Thanks for the protection. Thanks for surviving danger. Thanks for the victory. No one mentions the fires still dying behind them. The narrator pauses at this moment because this is where meaning begins to slip. Thanksgiving does not come after peace. It comes after violence has produced an advantage. Bells ring when the balance has already tilted. Gratitude is spoken once the threat has been pushed back, at least for now. This is not an exception. This is a pattern. In the early colonies, Thanksgiving has no fixed date. It is not tied to harvest. It does not repeat on a calendar. It is declared when needed, after a victory, after a suppression, after a town has been forced into silence. When events turn in their favor, they call it a reason to give thanks. Gratitude becomes punctuation for violence. These proclamations are written in moral language. God has favored us. The enemy has been driven back. Order has been restored. There is no need to describe what happened for that order to appear. It is enough to state that it was justified. Language does the rest. The narrator emphasizes the repetition. Each time conflict ends with an advantage on one side, a day of thanksgiving appears, not to remember what was lost, but to frame what was gained. When a day is named Thanksgiving, a way of telling is chosen. That tells places victory at the center and pushes everything else to the margins. What does not fit gratitude is not mentioned. Over time, the word Thanksgiving begins to carry a different tone. It is no longer only an emotion. It becomes a signal that power has been secured, that violence has been legitimized, that the outcome deserves ritual protection. Church bells do not ask who paid the cost. Not everyone attending these services feels the contradiction. For them, survival is proof. If they are still standing, if their community remains, then what happened before is treated as necessary. Thanksgiving does not erase violence. It turns violence into a stepping stone. And when a stepping stone is used often enough, it becomes a foundation. The narrator does not call this hypocrisy. He does not call it malice. This is how communities soothe themselves when they must live with the consequences of choices already made. Calling it faith lightens the weight. Calling it God's will dissolves responsibility. Gratitude becomes a coating. As years pass, days of Thanksgiving drift away from their specific contexts. Burned towns disappear from shared memory. Church bells remain, words remain, ritual remains, but the link to violence is thinned until it is nearly invisible. What remains is a clean concept. When people speak of Thanksgiving as a value, they do not say that the value was forged in conflict. They do not say it was used to mark victory. They speak of abstract gratitude, of faith, of protection. The story becomes easier to tell once fire and force leave the frame. The narrator places you before an uncomfortable choice. You can call these days faith, or you can see them as justification. Both exist inside the same ritual. The difference lies in what you choose to look at, the symbol or the motive. As Thanksgiving is eventually gathered into a single day, the meaning of victory does not vanish. It is blurred. What was once declared after violence is retold as reunion. What was once a marker of power is presented as family tradition. History is not erased. It is trained. Trained to remember in a specific way. Trained to forget inconvenient parts. Trained to feel good about an outcome without looking back at the path that led there. And when a holiday is trained long enough, it begins teaching the next generations in return. The narrator does not ask you to reject gratitude. He asks you to question it. Grateful for what, and paid for by whom? Because if you do not ask, the ritual will answer for you. A day of Thanksgiving declared, after violence does not become peace. It becomes a message. We have won. And because we have won, we give thanks. The order matters more than it seems. This holiday is not born from peace. It is trained by violence. A body is pulled up from the thin ice of a stream. There is no need to look closely to know the man has been dead long enough to have no voice left. His name moves from mouth to mouth in whispers before being spoken aloud in a court that does not belong to his people. There is no real trial, only translation assumption and a conclusion already written. A rope is prepared. When the body drops, no one calls it a beginning, but it is the moment after which nothing can be undone. War ignites like a match struck in dry air. No long declaration, no drums, only a sequence of actions, interpreted in the worst possible way by both sides. Villages once abandoned become front lines. Paths once used for exchange become routes of flight. There is no room for neutrality. The narrator keeps a distance from blood. It is not needed. The numbers are enough. A death rate so high that every warm story once told begins to sound misplaced. Indigenous communities lose a large portion of their population in a short time. Families break apart, not through a single battle, but through chains of rupture. Those who leave to find food do not return. Those sent to deliver messages never arrive. Disappearance becomes routine. The Europeans do not escape cost either. Towns burn. Homes are abandoned. Night is no longer for rest, but for counting who is still able to stand guard. But the difference lies elsewhere. One side has another place to call home. The other does not. The imbalance begins to show. This war does not unfold as it does in paintings. It unfolds through disintegration, through the severing of survival networks, through forcing people to abandon their familiar land and enter a world without structure. When villages are destroyed, memory is destroyed with them. When families are separated, names are lost. Loss does not require explosions to exist. The narrator looks at consequence rather than the battle. Children who cannot find their parents. Adults who cannot find a reason to stay. Streams of people pushed into temporary spaces where life is managed by others. From self-governing communities to populations being processed. Power changes hands quietly. Every warm myth begins to crack here. Not because it is argued against, but because reality leaves no space for it to stand. When death rates rise beyond the point of naming individuals, stories of peaceful beginnings collapse under their own weight. No one tells children's stories during days like these. The narrator emphasizes what is often omitted. This war does not end only with winners and losers. It ends with one side's future narrowed until there is no way back. Survivors are scattered, placed under structures they did not choose, forced to adapt to rules written by others. Existence continues, but in a different shape. At this point, choice is no longer moral. It is biological. Fight and risk erasure. Submit and be crushed inside an order not built for you. There is no third option, no gray space to hide. Every path passes through loss. Those who once believed the alliance would preserve balance now see the scale snap. The arrivals that followed did what no treaty accounted for. Numbers themselves become a weapon. When numbers grow large enough, old agreements expire. Peace is not broken, it is surpassed. The narrator does not need to name the victor. The result speaks for itself. Land changes hands, authority shifts. Stories are selected for retelling. Other stories are pushed to the margins until they disappear. History continues, but memory is shortened. This is where the future collapses, not in a single moment, but through the accumulation of the irreversible. When the war ends, there is no return to before, only a new condition called order, and that order is not neutral. The narrator keeps his voice level because the weight is already there. No emphasis is required. When survival rates are examined, when the number of communities erased from the map is counted, gentle stories become impossible to hold. Truth does not need decoration. In the years that follow, things happen that cannot be turned into children's lessons, cannot be wrapped into family rituals, cannot be told without exposing the cost paid. And for that reason, they are often not told at all. This war does one very specific thing. It ends the ability to pretend everything began with goodwill. It forces history to choose between remembering fully or telling it gently. That choice will shape generations to come, and then they do the one thing you cannot turn into a children's story. Plymouth Square opens each morning as usual. People pass through, wind from the sea, and there at the center of view, a head mounted on a pike. No detailed description is needed. It is enough to know it is there. Day after day, year after year, not as an eruption of violence, but as a fixed object in the landscape. People walk past it. People grow used to it. The head stops being an event. It becomes background. No one lingers long. No explanation is required. Its presence says everything that needs to be said. This is the boundary. This is the consequence. This is what happens when order is challenged. No sign is needed. No speech. The pike does the work. Time passes, and children grow up in this town. They learn to walk, to speak, to see the world through what is always placed before them: the square, the church, and the pike. There is not always a new head, but the memory does not disappear when the pole stands empty. It has already done its job. It teaches a lesson without words. To children, this is not cruelty. It is an order, something that stands there because it belongs there, something that reminds them that some things cannot be done, lines that cannot be crossed. When they ask, adults do not tell the full story. They speak briefly, just enough. They say this is how the world works. The narrator looks at this and does not call it barbarism. He does not call it an exception. This is the politics of memory. Not memory that is told, but memory that is displayed. Who is allowed to remember, who is forced to forget, and who is reminded every day of their place in the story. The pike does not only hold a head, it holds a message, that the past can be nailed into a single image, that everything leading up to it no longer needs to be told if the consequence is visible enough. When a symbol is strong enough, it replaces the entire story that produced it. Newcomers to the town learn quickly. They look, they understand. No questions, no research. The order here is not debated, it is performed. And because it is performed publicly, it takes on the appearance of legitimacy. The narrator places you in the position of someone who lives here. You can look at the pike every day and learn how not to see it anymore. Familiarity dulls discomfort. Or you can look and remember that every symbol hides a longer chain of events. Remembering means pain. Forgetting means calm. This choice is never spoken aloud, but it is offered to every generation. Remember and carry responsibility for what happened, or forget and live more easily inside the existing order. Both have costs, and both serve different kinds of futures. Over time, the official story is simplified. The sequels disappear from books. What happens after the war is no longer named. People return to speaking of beginnings, of alliances, of feasts, of moments that can be placed on a dinner table. The pike remains, but it is no longer mentioned in the story. It exists as an excess detail. This is how a myth is built, not by inventing everything, but by removing what comes next, the part that makes the beginning impossible to keep innocent. When the sequel vanishes, the opening becomes easy to tell. The narrator does not ask you to tear down the symbol. He asks you to notice what it is doing. It not only threatens, it edits memory. It decides what is passed on and what is left behind. The pike does not need new blood to hold power. It only needs time. Time long enough for those who knew the full story to disappear. Time long enough for children to see it as scenery. Time long enough for silence to become tradition. Looking back, people will say this was another era, another world, but the order of memory established here does not vanish. It changes shape. It enters textbooks. It enters ritual. It enters holidays, told with warmer voices. The narrator closes with a cold observation. To build a myth, the sequel must disappear. Not through direct violence, but by no longer being told, no longer mentioned, no longer placed on the table. And when the sequel is gone long enough, the myth holds. Even while the pike still stands, newspapers are delivered early in the morning. Headlines pile up. Casualty lists run so long that no one finishes reading them. Letters from the front lie on kitchen tables, on mantels, in coat pockets not yet opened. On both sides, houses look the same in silence. A nation is tearing itself apart and no longer knows what is large enough to hold the pieces together. Not victory, not peace. Just a reason to still call itself one. The narrator keeps the camera wide, not in the trenches, not following a flag. What is missing is not weapons. What is missing is a story that can be spoken in many places at once without igniting more conflict. When people die every day, differences sharpen. And when differences grow too sharp, a shared ritual gains strategic value. For years before this moment, a patient campaign has been unfolding, quietly, without force. A woman writes steadily, writes to newspapers, writes to governors, writes about a formula that sounds familiar: family, the table, gratitude, tradition. Not a tradition that already exists, a tradition that needs to be created by repetition long enough that it sounds as if it has always been there. The narrator does not emphasize her name. The individual is not the point. The method is. Use journalism to unify language. Use family emotion to bypass political division. Use a holiday without explicit religious alignment to avoid choosing sides. The formula is refined over the years, waiting for the moment the nation needs it most. That moment arrives when every other option carries risk. A speech can be divided. A military decision can deepen hatred. But a holiday works differently. It does not require agreement on cause. It only requires doing the same thing, stopping together, bowing together, saying a word that sounds harmless. The leader needs a ritual that can pass through battle lines, one that does not name right or wrong, that does not reopen complex beginnings, that does not dig into what is currently taking people's lives. A ritual broad enough for each side to place its own meaning inside, an empty frame. The proclamation is born in that context. It speaks of gratitude, of pausing amid suffering, of the thin hope that this nation still has something to give thanks for while it is bleeding. It does not mention pilgrims. It does not mention a first feast. It does not reconstruct a fairy tale. It simply sets a marker, a day, a shared rhythm. The narrator emphasizes the silence. The silence is deliberate. When unity is needed, contested details are set aside. History is not denied. It is postponed. The immediate task is to keep the pieces from falling further apart. The story can come later. The choice is clear. Speak the full truth and accept that it divides at a moment when wounds are open, or use a softer myth to hold the nation together long enough to survive. Neither choice is clean. One prioritizes cohesion. The other prioritizes precision. The ritual is chosen because it works. It enters households faster than politics. It reaches the kitchen before the legislature. It allows people to sit at the same table without agreeing on everything. In a nation that is bleeding, that matters. After the proclamation, the rest is built gradually. Newspapers repeat it. Schools simplify it. Families pass it down. Hard edges are trimmed away. Easy pieces are kept. A new holiday takes on the appearance of great age, a tradition that sounds as if it has always existed. The narrator returns to the core truth. Myths are not born at the beginning. They are added later when it is safe to add them, when a nation needs a gentler origin than a civil war, when dinner tables need warmth more than trenches, when children need a story that does not force them to carry adult grief. This is memory politics at a national scale. Choose what helps survival first. Edit later. Not out of malice, out of priority. At that moment, the priority is preventing further fracture. The narrator places you in the position of the decision maker. You can preserve full truth and accept division while the wound is still open. Or you can use a story soft enough to bind at the cost of blurring truth. This choice does not happen once. It repeats whenever a nation enters a crisis. The holiday is chosen not for its past. It is chosen for the future it can produce. A shared rhythm, a habit, a reminder that regardless of side, people still share a table on one day. The narrator saves the final point for what is often missed. The proclamation does not mention pilgrims. The myth comes later, on purpose, when the time is right, when it no longer threatens unity. And when the myth arrives, it will look as if it has always been there. A textbook lies open on a school desk. Flat pages, soft colors. A picture hangs on the classroom wall. Figures stand in a neat line. A small play is rehearsed in the multi-purpose room. Paper hats, feathers cut from colored cardboard, short lines, scattered laughter. There is no sense of danger, no hard questions, only a story compact enough to teach in a single morning. The images repeat until they no longer register as choices: pilgrims dressed in dark clothes, indigenous people wearing feathers, both smiling. The distance between them is flattened. Sharp edges are sanded down. Years vanish. Consequences are pushed outside the frame. The story is compressed to fit a young memory. The narrator looks at how these images are standardized, not to accuse the illustrators, but to expose the mechanism. When a story must be passed to children, it has to be easy to swallow. When it must be taught everywhere, it has to look the same everywhere. Difference becomes noise. Noise is removed. The characters that remain are the ones that do not create discomfort. Industrious pilgrims, friendly natives. No one asks what happens next. No one asks why these characters do not appear again once the story ends. Disappearance is treated as a natural conclusion. In classrooms, time is a tool. A single lesson cannot hold multiple layers of meaning. A school year cannot hold too many contradictions. So the story is cut most conveniently. The beginning is kept. The middle is blurred. The aftermath is discarded. The narrator calls this the production of forgetting, not as a hidden conspiracy, but as a process. Textbooks must sell. Curricula must align. Children need a story that will not cause conflict at home. Each step is optimized for smoothness. And when everything is smooth, what hurts has no place. The images teach children how to look, who stands at the center, who becomes the background, who appears briefly and then vanishes. When a group of people exists only as an opening act, they are taught as a stepping stone, not as people who continue to live change and respond. The play ends, children bow, parents clap, cameras capture the moment. No one feels they have just participated in a decision about memory, but that is exactly what has happened. One version repeated, one version reinforced. The narrator does not deny the value of simplicity. Children need a starting point. The problem begins when the starting point is locked in as the ending. When the story does not open further, collective memory learns where it is allowed to stop. Over time, these images grow up with the viewer. They become the background for later understanding. When conflicting information appears, that background does not vanish. It reacts. It defends the first image because that image is tied to childhood, to safety, to the feeling of having been taught correctly. The narrator places you before an uncomfortable choice. Learn how to remember, which means accepting that gentle stories have ungentle sequels. Learn how to forget, which means preserving the calm of familiar images. Both are skills that are taught, one officially, one quietly. Forgetting in this context is not a lack of information. It is the result of design. What is not printed, what is not performed, what is not asked. When a generation grows up inside the same frame, that frame becomes natural. The narrator points out a small but crucial detail. In children's stories, people are treated as if they simply vanished, not killed, not pushed out, just no longer there. This ambiguity lightens moral weight. No one is responsible for something that is never named. When myth enters childhood, it gains its greatest advantage. It arrives before the capacity for doubt forms. It shapes feeling before it shapes reasoning. Later, when the complex truth appears, it must move against an already stabilized structure. The narrator does not ask for textbooks to be destroyed. He asks for them to be expanded, not to stop at the picture, not to stop at the play, to ask the next question. The question the simple story does not answer, because when forgetting is manufactured as a product, memory becomes a consumer choice. You can choose the comfortable version, or you can choose the fuller one. Both have a cost. The narrator ends this part with a bitter aftertaste. The people in the story are treated as if they vanished, but they did not vanish. They were pushed out of the frame, and when the frame is taught early enough, bringing them back becomes far more difficult. A modern dining table is set on time: ceramic plates, forks and knives, napkins folded neatly. An empty chair sits at the head of the table or against the wall. No one mentions it, but no one takes it. It exists as excess space, not for guests, not for hosts. Just a seat kept open out of habit, or because no one wants to explain why it is empty. The meal begins. Conversation flows over that space. The narrator does not slow the pace. Everything unfolds as it does every year. Calendar reminders, familiar recipes, old stories retold with new voices. Someone speaks about what they are grateful for. Someone else smiles and nods. Nothing is wrong. Nothing needs correcting. But the empty chair remains. It does not ask to be invited. It simply exists. Elsewhere on the same day, another group gathers differently. No long dining table. No smell of food fills a house. They stand or sit in a circle. Names are read aloud, not to celebrate, to remember. There are no thanks for victory, only acknowledgement that things were lost and never returned. The two scenes run in parallel. They do not confront each other. They do not deny one another. They simply coexist. One calls it tradition. The other calls it a day of remembrance. Both are doing what they were taught was right, and both carry a history longer than the meal in front of them. The narrator does not ask you to leave the table. He does not ask you to reject your family. He does not ask you to turn a holiday into a courtroom. He asks only that you look. Look at what is not present, yet still shapes how you sit down. Look at which story must be told for the meal to proceed smoothly. The empty chair does not represent personal guilt. It represents collective absence. People who had names, who had families, who had seasons of their own. They do not appear as ghosts in a frightening sense. They appear as what was never invited back into the story. The narrator keeps his voice level. No accusations, no calls for redemption. Only the observation that the convenience of a myth always requires someone to remain silent. And when silence lasts long enough, it becomes part of the scenery, like the empty chair. In many families, children ask why this day matters. Adults answer with what they were taught. A first feast, a peaceful beginning, a story safe enough not to spill a glass. That answer is not wrong in its intention. It is simply incomplete. In other communities, the question is reversed. Why is this not a day of celebration? Why can this memory be wrapped neatly? Why is the meal not the center? These questions are not meant to divide. They are meant to keep part of history from disappearing. The narrator places the final choice before you. You can still eat, still gather, still give thanks for what you have, and at the same time, you can acknowledge that what you have rests on losses not placed on the table. Seeing does not require renunciation. It only requires honesty with the full picture. This honesty does not feel comfortable at first. It leaves an aftertaste, but that is the cost of looking directly without punishing yourself. No guilt, no shame, just the maturity of memory. The narrator returns to the empty chair one last time. It does not demand to be filled. It asks only not to be covered with a cloth, to pretend it does not exist. Once you see it, the story no longer operates in your mind in the same way, and that change does not need to be announced. Thanksgiving continues to exist. It exists not because it is fully true, it exists because it is useful. It allows a nation to sit at one table without agreeing on everything. It allows families to gather without resolving all of history in one evening. But usefulness does not erase consequence. Every year the table is set again. Every year the story is told familiarly. And every year the ghosts are present, not to ruin the meal, but to remind us that history does not vanish simply because we do not invite it to sit down. The narrator ends here, not with a call to action, but with a simple truth. You can keep the ritual, you can keep the family, you can keep the warmth. But if you dare to see the cost, the story will no longer control you in the same way. Thanksgiving survives, not because it is true, but because it is useful, and the table is set every year, whether the ghosts are invited or not.